Gravity Falls is a show known for many things: its humor, mysteries, and amazing writing, but also its monsters. This show has some of the weirdest, sometimes horrifying creatures that make no biological sense, from glowing horns to shape-shifting, and every time I watch it, I'm begged to ask, what are these things? What is a multi-bear or octopus? Well, in this video, I solve all those questions and more, figuring out how these things can function, how their gimmicks can make sense, and the horrifying biology of Gravity Fall monsters. Let me explain. Gnomes are weird. These uncomfortably obsessed with marrying children, little bearded men appear many times in the show, being the first main monsters or creatures in episode 1. Now, these monsters have two defining traits that I want to try and explain and figure out how they work, being their uncanny ability to consume any item, whether it's a pair of glasses to a can, and their weird eldritch horror power-up of combining into the hellish monster that is this. Let's start with the eating everything part, as I think that one is pretty easy to solve. We see them eat glass, tin cans, trash, normal food like pies, and basically any solid object, no matter if it's metal or real food. This means they are obviously not normal omnivores. They are basically extremophile scavengers, which is a type of organism that eats things we would consider inedible. Most people know this through two examples: goats that eat metal scraps and claws, and termites that can digest wood. We also have vultures that can eat rotting fleshful bacteria, deep sea tube worms that eat literal sulfur, and of course some forms of bacteria that eat plastic and oil. The gnomes themselves probably have some form of extreme scavenger species that have a general diet in eating anything before competition gets to it. And well, in Gravity Falls, that's not the worst trait to evolve, gonna be honest. Now, touching a little more on how they actually digest these items, their stomach is probably a microreactor with a system closer to cows, termites, and even a compost pile if you use the system of them compared to humans, which is ironic, being they look exactly like little bearded men. Inside their gut would live many things that would act as basically a composter for anything they consume, like metal oxidizing bacteria, plastic degrading microbes, fungal symbiotes, or acid producing extremophiles. Simply put, their stomach acid would need to be insane. The pH of human stomach acid is between 3 to 1.5, with the lower the better, and the strongest stomach acid being in vultures, a known scavenger animal, with a 1. For gnomes to work, they would need near battery acid that lets them dissolve glass, corrode metal, and break down all the many items they like to eat. Moving on, we can touch our other very core and a more difficult issue, being the Voltron Megazord style transformation these gnomes do, becoming a large monster built out of gnomes. Yeah, at first I just didn't know what to say here, but after doing some research, I can kind of stretch some things and give you a solution. See, in nature, we have organisms that somewhat do similar things, like slime molds or certain ants that can form rafts and bridges with their body, and even my favorite, the Portuguese man of war. This is a jellyfish-like organism that is actually a colony of many, acting as a machine that all do similar functions for the larger body. This is the model I'll be using for the gnomes. It does mean that gnomes actually as a species have a true form, being this giant gnome, and the individual mode they sometimes use is the secondary one for scouting and being individuals. It also, in a more funny way, means gnomes are the apex predator in this form, even though they are by far the most laughed at and bullied creature in the show. And with that, I'd like to move on to another creature, being the unicorn. And oh boy, are these things weird in some strange ass ways. Let me explain. But before I do that, how about you do something for me? It's very simple, I promise. Simply push that subscribe button if you like that, maybe turn on notifications. But really, it would be very nice of you. I've undermined the idea in the past and felt it silly, but apparently asking people to subscribe actually works. If you like the video and getting more videos, since I'm trying to do the insane task of 3 videos a week, it would be great if you subscribed and just watched. Either way, back to the video. At first glance, unicorns don't have much to talk about, but they actually do have two major traits, being their glowing horn and the ability to play rave music out of them. Yeah, I don't know how I can explain that one, but I'm gonna try anyway. Let's start with the simple one, the glowing horn. It's actually a pretty easy thing to solve, being that many animals have glowing body parts, or in science terms, bioluminescence. Now, there are different forms of this, from fireflies to deep sea fish, and when figuring out the horn, I would say it's not really a horn, but a bioluminescent organ made of crystal and modified keratin. See, normal horns, like say rhinos, are just made of keratin, but a unicorn horn is probably a mixture mixture of things besides the keratin. Now, the way bioluminescence actually works is through two chemicals, luferin, which is the fuel, and luferase, which acts as the enzyme. These, when mixed, create light. Now, our horn probably contains stacks of these chemicals inside its keratin shell that pump through tiny channels through the internal crystal, making the horn glow. And it made sense. The unicorns are known to lie about their powers and abilities, and this glowing horn could be almost like an intimidation trick to scare other species into thinking it'll do something. This especially makes sense in a world with magic and demonic triangles. Now, with that, we have a bigger problem, and not an easy one. The rave music. This sounds ridiculous because it is. I guess the only real way to think about this is instead of seeing the rave music as music, we see it as just sound. Maybe even weaponized sound. Many animals use sound as defense or just a way to hurt other animals, and some could say rave music at a decimal level and power to be seen as a weapon. Please stay with me. For example, the cicada hits 120 decimals at its strongest, and that can damage the human ear. Pistol shrimps even create sonic shockwaves at their enemies like a pistol with a gun. So why can't the unicorn shoot sonic bullets of rave music at its enemies at 120 decimals while glowing? I see no reason why they can't, so that will be my analysis and answer to the very strange unicorn. And with that, let's move on to another fan favorite, not species but character, the multi-bear. The multi-bear is not a normal bear, also not being a species, but instead one weird organism that possesses the body of a large bear with 8 heads and 12 limbs. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, most bears aren't like this. Now, on closer look, the multi-bear seems to be built in 3 distinct bodies, with one main head that is intelligent, while the other heads are far more animalistic and bear-like. So when trying to port him to the real world, we need to look at him as not a distinct species, but a bear that just isn't exactly normal. Now, of course, we have animals that are born with multiple heads, like snakes or turtles, but there are also animals that in birth had their embryos infused in one organism that I think he actually may be. Now, how you actually get to the multiple bear bodies is pretty simple, being the early embryos during the blastocyst stage fusing and forming into one organism. This is literally what happens with conjoined twins, or chimeras, which is basically one organism that is built out of the tissue of multiple. Moving on to explaining the heads, the reason there's only one smart one is all because of the nervous system. See, when there are multiple brains in a chimera, then one nervous system usually becomes dominant, usually based on the blood flow and the connection of nerves inside the body, and if their brain controlling things would be best for the animal. Now, the other heads can still have bodily movement like jaw control, reflexes, and vocal cords, which allow them to growl and bite and be the animal they actually act like. The best way to explain why is comparing to how certain animals like fish or chicken moving after being decapitated, or more lightly, how you can have reflexes in your spinal cord without your brain doing anything. This is really all there is to go over for the multi-bear because we only see one, and we can kind of assume it's a mutation, so explaining it away becomes far easier than trying to figure out how an entire species evolved like that. And with that, I'm ready to cover the last monster, and probably the most difficult one because its biology is truly supernatural, something I don't think I can truly explain, but we'll try anyway. Is it zombies? No. Is it ghosts? No, thankfully. It's the shapeshifter. The shapeshifter is a larva-like creature who has the ability to transform into literally anything. It can survive being frozen into a literal block of ice, as we know it was frozen in the tubes before we see in the show, and supposedly didn't die at the end of its own episode, and can also survive as an egg buried in the dirt for an unknown amount of time till Ford finds him. The creature must have been able to survive on very little food, being that it was also stuck in a cave for decades with just beans. Some theorize it's an alien due to some connections between it and, well, the aliens wear T-suits in the show and then learn more about in later books, but like, it really doesn't matter if it is or not because it has no effect on how stupidly crazy it is, and more importantly, me needing to figure it out. Let's start with the basics. What kind of organism could it be in the first place? Well, with all we know about it, I think the best one to describe it is a sewer organism, specifically one that has an extreme life stage transformation that revamps their entire body, like a caterpillar that liquefies itself when turning into a butterfly, a tadpole that rearranges its organs, or something I was personally horrified by when learning of, being some insects eat their own body like soup and rebuild it from their own stem cells. And with all these things, the shapeshifter is likely a creature whose entire body is made of pluripotent stem cells that can become any tissue at any time. They basically can do all the things these animals do in their extreme life cycles at any time on demand. They literally act as a permanent larva that never finishes its metamorphosis, instead using an extreme body adaptation to do all these insane things. Now, scaling this to the the absurdity of just shapeshifting does require some sci-fi bullshitting, but still, we can try. We know it needs to see the thing it's shapeshifting into in the first place, and according to Ford, warps its DNA to match it. I'm just gonna ignore how it would even get the DNA match, because I have no fucking clue, but with that, we can imagine it acting like an octopus that can change its skin texture, color, pattern, or even cuttlefish that can mimic the sound of their animals by observing them in seconds. Now, I'm gonna just push past a lot of science here, because really, this thing is so hard to explain. I had an easier time explaining Barney the dinosaur and the minions than this thing, because what can I even say? But moving on, let's try to explain the freezing ability and how it can survive such harsh conditions. This part is actually pretty real and grounded in science for once. Animals survive being frozen all the time, usually because they produce protection in their bodies to these colds that stop ice crystals from shedding through their cells and freezing them. The shapeshifter just pushes this further by stopping its own metabolism, converting tissue into a gel-like state, and basically entering hibernation when frozen. And with that, we can do our final task and probably the stupidest. How does he survive on beans? Beans shouldn't give the energy he needs, being that he's a literal shapeshifter, unless he doesn't use energy or a lot of it. See, larval organisms are built for a few major things, one being to survive starvation. They have slow metabolism, store energy in tissue, and hibernate for years. They're literal insects that go years without food, so why can't he? I propose our weird shapeshifting eldritch horror is that of an extreme permanent larva that can go without food for years, can survive extreme temperatures, and somehow shapeshift. And with that, I have gone through every Gravity Falls monster I could realistically find and included this video and figure out their biology, how their gimmick works no matter how stupid, and solve the eldritch horrors of Gravity Falls. If you would like more videos like this, click on this playlist right here for my overanalyzing science videos on nostalgic shows, or this video which YouTube thinks you'll like. Either way, bye!